I call upon Delegation Mark Cooper.
Just broke my keyboard. That's okay.
I'll ask you to please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, and where you happen to live. You'll have 5 minutes to address City Council, after which you'll have the opportunity to answer questions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship. So my name is Mark Cooper. I represent the Saskatchewan Construction Association and its many construction employers. I live here in Regina. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak to Council. I'm, as I mentioned here today, on behalf of the Saskatchewan Construction Association and our members to specifically speak to Council's proposal to pursue the fair wage policy. Our position on this issue, I think, is well understood from the opportunity we had to speak last week. So I'm going to try and bring a few different perspectives based on what I've been hearing in the last week or so in conversation. So let me again unequivocally state that our industry supports the core objectives that have been expressed by Council's motion, and that we really fully support the recommendations that were advanced by administration. We do not, however, support the introduction of a fair wage policy. We want to see infrastructure work, as much of that as possible, go to local companies and be done by local workers. We want those local workers to be well paid and have a high quality of life and to be safe. We want that workforce to be representative of our community, and we want our work and our community to be sustainable in every sense of the word. But the claims that we have heard from those in favor of fair wage, let me address some of those. So one is that this isn't really just about construction, but perhaps more targeted to those businesses where low wages are in fact a problem, and especially when the city is considering potentially outsourcing some work that would previously have been done by own forces and things like that. And yet all of the discussion has been about construction, all of it. And there's been zero evidence provided at any point that the construction industry has a wage problem here in Regina. In fact, all of the evidence that you've been provided, both by delegates and by your own administration, has told you the opposite, that construction in Regina does not have a wage problem. We've also heard the idea that bidders will welcome the change because it will remove wage-based considerations from bidding. However, yet again, we have not received any evidence at all that this is in fact the case. I represent the construction industry, the hundreds and hundreds of employers, thousands, who work across Saskatchewan. Most of our prominent members are the primary bidders on construction projects that the City of Regina undertakes. And they tell me, as you'll hear from other delegates, that wages are not a consideration now when it comes to bidding, and it's not a factor in who wins or who loses, because there's not wide variances in wages across the construction industry. So I can say definitively that that is not a problem. I can also say definitively from talking to these construction leaders over the last few days, and I know many of them have been speaking to you as well, that putting this policy in place will be one more barrier for them in considering whether or not to bid on City of Regina work. We've also heard that companies in construction are already paying well, so why do we need to do this? We don't have a problem. And I really think that the problem isn't trying to solve fair wage in construction. The problem is trying to introduce a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. So here's where I think we're at. Fair wages are a good idea. People should be paid fairly. They should be properly rewarded and awarded for their labor. However, construction does not have a wage problem anywhere along the employment spectrum. That's clear. There's been no evidence provided to justify the inclusion of a fair wage policy, and it seems clear that it's a solution introduced without a problem. Maybe not the best strategy. At least that's true when it comes to construction. So let's be 100% clear. A fair wage policy will increase the cost of construction, and it will make the City of Regina less competitive when it comes to attracting quality local bidders. And as a result of that, it in effect becomes a taxpayer-subsidized increase to construction. So that's the decision, I believe, that you're confronted with as council, especially in light of the fact that you have a clear recommendation from your administration and from the industry that represents the people who bid on this work telling you that this is not a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. I have some questions from council. Councillor Mancinelli.
I guess in terms of the mention of this having to do with construction, would it surprise you the conversation has revolved around construction because of the representatives from the lobby groups of construction being in the meetings, and thereby that being the groups that we've had to talk about? just for terms, there's been 35 million worth of goods and services outside of the construction for Regina for procurement. And I was just wondering if you were aware of that.
Oh, I'm very aware of the fact that construction is the biggest spend in procurement, right? And so when it comes to procurement conversations, it should be at the center of the conversation. I'm biased, but I like it when any conversation centers on construction. And so I don't have any problem talking about construction. The issue is here we're talking about a fair wage, right? And the question of whether or not a fair wage policy is necessary. And I think, no, I don't think, I know that the evidence that's been presented to council, both by your administration and by delegates, has been clear that it's not necessary when it comes to construction. And so, you know, there was in passing comments made by councillors during the executive committee that that part of the rationale behind this is introducing it to address other issues related to other industries where wages may be lower, right? I mean, and so below the living wage. And I think that's legitimate, and I think that those are things that should be looked at. And I think that the city of Regina can have a fair wage policy relating to certain industries where there's a clear problem without it applying carte blanche to all industries, right? You don't have to have one solution to fit every situation, especially if you don't have a problem. So if you have industries that need to be targeted, you know, listen, we're an industry association, and if there are bad actors that need to be targeted, those bad actors need to be targeted, and we as an industry will stand up and we will call them out, right? But we don't have that problem when it comes to fair wages with construction in Regina or in Saskatchewan. So respectfully, I would say focus the solution on the problem, not on all situations.
Okay, I guess just to break this down a hair, my first question was, were you aware that the city spends $35 million outside of construction every year? So construction is our largest, 134 million, but 35 million spent on goods and services, non-professional.
Right.
In the industries that might be paying low wages. I just wanted to make sure you knew that's what we're discussing.
Yeah.
And this is a procurement policy, not a construction procurement policy, so
Right.
it kind of falls under with construction. So if you're feeling targeted in construction, I just was wondering if that might be a feeling that's been felt by your industry, somewhat targeted by this policy? Is that
Yes.
what's going on?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I guess to follow up on that, being that this is over and above construction, and I believe you fully when you say construction agencies already pay over and above, would it be a problem to get an extra point on a procurement sheet, being that you're all paying over and above? If you are paying a fair wage just by self-reporting, would it be burdensome or problematic just to admit that you're paying your guys deadly?
Well, if just saying, hey, yeah, we pay people above that would be enough, then maybe not, but it won't be enough, right? That's the problem, because there's rightly so, there has to be an auditable trail when you request something. Not only that, but now all of your procurement officials have to be of the same understanding of how to value that and what is fair and what isn't fair. So it's not as simple as just saying, do you pay your people enough, yes or no, right? It will require, and your own administration will tell you, it will require the development, of course, of the policies and the procedures and an understanding of that and testing of all of that. So it's going to take a lot of time and energy and effort to achieve what? What does it achieve?
I'm sorry, I
when it
can't
comes
answer
to
questions.
construction.
I have to
I know that, and that's okay. But I would point out that question has not been answered. And so, you know, it's one thing to say that we should continue to have more discussions about how we address fair wage issues where it's a problem. It's another thing to say, let's go and develop a fair wage policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. You had just spoke about the cost. You said the cost will increase like to construction, and then again, just can you elaborate on that, through the chair?
Yeah, so, I mean, what we've, risk and work translate into cost, right, in construction. And so if you're bidding for something and you factor in the extra time and energy and effort that's necessary to comply with a new regulation, then the company, rightly so, prices that in to their bidding. Today, the City of Regina gets higher pricing on some of your bids than you would otherwise because of some of the you know, challenging contractual obligations that we've talked about in previous discussions. I think that's going to change as administration continues to work with industry to work that out. But the reason that happens is because contractors price in the cost of doing business with the City of Regina into their bids. And so, yes, absolutely, you will see increase because of that, the additional administration that's placed on the city. And so you will get bids. Those bids will be competitive with each other, but there will be a cost with that the city is paying as a result of that. So, and if the benefit outweighs the cost, that's a decision that, of course, council is empowered to make. But I think it's important to really look at whether or not you have the evidence before you to be able to make that conclusion. And so because as I said, where the cost comes in is it gets built into the bid. The other thing that I would say is, comparing Regina to Vancouver or Toronto is an interesting analysis. The reality is that the construction marketplace in Saskatchewan is not nearly the size of Vancouver, Toronto. So just as an example, Toronto needs more construction workers in the next decade for condo development than Saskatchewan has construction workers, right? So totally different scale, and I'm not suggesting that one is better or worse than the other at all, but what I would say is that a policy introduced by, say, the City of Vancouver or the City of Toronto, whether 100-year-old or not, has a much smaller impact in a bigger market than a policy introduced by the City of Regina, which is one of the biggest procurers of services in the Regina area. And so it's an outweighed responsibility that belongs to the City of Regina to understand the impact of the moves you make in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess the last question, just off of Councillor Mancinelli's question, was if we create a question and they get a tick because they're paying a living wage, again, how would that be monitored in your view? And is there, for every wage, is there deemed a living wage? Who determines that? And is there some subjectivity upon that as well, through the chair?
Yeah, for sure there is subjectivity. I mean, so the way it works with, say, the federal government program, which is technically no longer functioning, although it does, because there's still some projects that were carryover from, I think, 2014 when it was shut down. And so if you look online, you'll see the federal government's fair wages for Saskatchewan in construction, which are far too low, in my opinion, but they're there, right? And those are established. So somebody had to establish that, right? And those change year in and year out, right? Based on the conditions in the marketplace. So those have to be monitored and maintained. They have to be, of course, discussed and developed, I would assume, in collaboration and discussion with industry and labor. And then they have to be reported on, because if you're asking for something, so there's two parts. One, if you're asking for something, it has to be properly collected and documented so that it can be audited, right? You have a responsibility with the public purse to be able to do that. So your administration is certainly going to have cost, and that burden is going to be put onto the contractor, so the cost will be put back onto the city. The other piece is, if it's simply a tick box and a point, and everybody's already above it, what have you accomplished? Everybody gets another point. Congratulations, what has that achieved? And so really, again, comes back to something that is frankly wholly unnecessary, at least when it comes to construction. So, you want to apply it to other industries. I'm not going to suggest you should or shouldn't, but that's a different conversation. But you don't need to apply it to construction.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Through the chair. You've talked about the burden and cost.
Yeah.
When your members submit bids to the city, do they incorporate labor costs into their bidding?
Mm-hmm.
Do your members make that number up, or do they base it on compensation packages that they know and therefore reflect in the bid? So they understand the cost.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So does the city audit your receipts when it comes to how much a company pays for raw materials like steel or other goods required for construction?
I would assume that, but I don't actually know that happens, Councillor.
Can you account for the costs associated to businesses in small municipalities where these policies exist? How many got starved out of the market? Did it make it more expensive? Is there any way to track that? I haven't been able to find any evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, it's trackable in the sense of, and I think my colleague Kevin, so not to put you on the spot, Kevin, but when he comes up, he's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the impact of increases in construction costs in terms of the loss of bids, and so hopefully he is going to talk about that, because I think he is. So he'll probably be able to better address that, Councillor. I apologize that I don't have that, but he will be able to give you a little more info on that.
We're talking about construction simply because you're sitting in that chair.
Yeah, yeah.
If you remove journey persons, how does that affect the average wage rate, like if we're comparing it to laborers and others?
Yeah, so you still have the same, I mean, if you remove journey persons, it would obviously lower the average wage. If you removed first-year apprentices, it would increase it, right? I mean, that's the nature of a gradient industry and workforce. The question, I think, is, do you have a significant portion, or really any portion at all, of the construction labor force, especially apprentices, making below a living wage, right? And I think without, you know, the definitive evidence in front of me, which I'd like to point out none of us has, it's not clear to me that we have a problem.
In jurisdictions where they have implemented living wages and fair wage policies, industry came forward and said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the outcomes, there was then evidence because of the inspectorate system of unpaid hours, unpaid overtime, undue classification of workers, underpayment of wages, non-payment, underreporting of hours, etc. So in other words, we find problems when we have a system in place. Everyone's said they're honest in all of these jurisdictions, yet it finds that.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah. No, I mean, would it surprise me that there are bad actors? No. Would it surprise me if those bad actors make up anything more than a 1 or 2% of the industry? Yeah, it would. I would also, again, you know, it's something we've talked about in previous conversations, but note that city contracts are with the general contractors, right? I'm not going to name the companies that, you know, are going to be the prominent ones, but we know who they are, the ones in our communities who do most of the commercial construction work. So those contracts with those companies, the ones who are winning the vast majority of these bids and doing this work, they're the ones, of course, that are talking to me and saying that they have concerns about this policy and what it will mean for them and for their cost to do business with the city. But they're not the bad actors, right? And so if the issue is how do we target companies that are paying their people poorly, I think that's a good conversation to have. I think that's something we can have together. I'm not sure that the right approach, in fact, I'm sure that that it is not the right approach to have a blanket solution that says because there may be some bad actors, probably are, but maybe, we don't have that definitive evidence here, because there may be, we're therefore going to treat everybody with the same approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Stanichuk.
Thank you. Through the chair, I want to follow up on points that were made by the president of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour. She talked a lot about apprenticeship, and that, you know, about the hiring. So we know that in the construction industry, people are paid well, as you have said many times. Many of them are trades.
Yeah.
But what about that system of going through the apprenticeship system so that people are earning a good wage while they're going through that? Is that something that needs to be addressed? Do you believe that?
So me personally, yes, not through a fair wage policy, but yes. And so it's, you know, I think Lori is right, and I think that you know, Jeff and others that you will hear from, and Dion, who wasn't here with us, are right about the fact, and you heard me say in our meeting last week, that the further professionalization of the trades is important for the industry, right? And that industry-driven model, where we have more trades that are compulsory, which is a provincial policy matter, but you know, I think there's ways we can collaborate together, owners like the city and the industry, will have the knock-on effect of creating more local training, which is important for where that training doesn't exist, and it will further lead to more consistent gradients in the salary increases, right? Because you know, because there's a schedule laid out through that, which is important. And so I think where as a industry and as a province we can move to have more compulsory trades, that's good for construction and good for the province as well, because it creates that standardization, which makes it more likely from a workforce standpoint that we will have more Red Seal, Journey people in more trades that then can be mobile and we can attract more here. So I think that's a good strategy. I don't think that the tactic of a fair wage policy moves us in that direction.
Okay. Secondly, through the chair, you've commented a lot that we don't have, there's some information that we don't have. I actually tried to get some information from the City of North Vancouver, which has a fair wage policy, just to try to understand a little bit more about theirs. I do know that their schedule is just the trades that's in their schedule, who probably would be paid well anyway. Have you had a chance to talk to any other jurisdictions, so counterparts in other jurisdictions, where they have to abide by a fair wage policy in terms of how difficult it is to administer or comply with?
Yeah, I think in fact, I was talking just recently with colleagues from the British Columbia Construction Association about some of the challenges in the market there. And it kind of led to the comment that I made a few minutes earlier, where I talked about the comparison between markets is fair to some extent, but each market is unique too, right? And so in the case of Vancouver, the City of North Van is a relatively small purchaser in the scope of all of the procurement that happens in the city, right? And so not every contractor, in fact, most of the large-scale commercial contractors aren't pursuing a lot of that work. That's not the case here, right? Here, in the case of the City of Regina, it is one of the largest. I can't say the largest. I'm guessing the province is larger, and maybe there's some others, but you're definitely going to be in the top, 5, right? Procurers of construction services. So you're a key driver for the construction industry in terms of employment, in terms of success, in terms of the growth of new and emerging small businesses. And so a policy implemented here, it has greater weight than it would, say, in North Van. And as a result of that, I think it requires that extra diligence to make sure that it's a solution that is meeting a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanachek. Seeing no further questions from council, I'll thank you very much for appearing. Mr. Cooper, and ask you to return to the gallery. Again, I'll call upon delegation Kevin Dureau. Mr. Dureau, I'll have you introduce yourself for the record, the organization you represent, as well as where you reside, and you'll have 5 minutes to present to council, after which you'll have the opportunity to answer any questions. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Masters and council. It is my privilege to once again be before you today and present, representing the construction industry, not from just Regina, but Saskatchewan, and I live in Regina, Ward 7. I'm pleased to be able to offer full support of Regina's construction companies for the recommendations outlined in the report from administration. Your administration's engagement was extensive and thorough over the past year. I am concerned that tasking them to go back and spend another year developing a plan against their own recommendation will be a significant cost and burden on the taxpayers. If implemented next year, the administrative costs for both your administration and construction companies will be passed along, once again affecting the bottom line of the city's budgets. When it comes to sustainable procurement, we agree with the recommendation outlined by the city administration. Specifically, we support the mandated requirement that contractors working for the City of Regina must have CORE or C-CORE. We would like to suggest that all city employees working in construction also take the training through the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association, and that road crews take safety training through the Saskatchewan Heavy Safety Association as well. Aligning training for all workers, regardless of their employer, should be mandated to make safer job sites. Additionally, we support the City of Regina's desire to see all construction work in Regina being done by Regina companies and by Regina people. I wholeheartedly endorse this approach. In order to ensure that the city is able to execute on this vision, you can engage effectively with local industry to keep contractors informed about upcoming projects. Again, the pre-bid concept, letting us know what is upcoming so we can let our contractors know and plan. You can provide what we call early contractor engagement far in advance of what the procurement phase. When the city is first contemplating a project, you can engage exclusively with local contractors to discuss potential solutions to a project, scopes of work, and the planned budgets and timelines. You can also use industry-driven systems like SupplierLink, Fix It Up, and the RCA Plan Room to better connect with local contractors and require reasonable and trade-compliant data points from contractors that will support local companies. You can also require contractors to be a member of an industry organization such as the Regina Construction Association, Saskatchewan Construction Association, Sask Heavy Construction Association, and the Regina Region Home Builders Association. Our collective members provide exceptional quality work and are leaders within the industry, thus why we believe a fair wage they're already overpaying. Not overpaying, but paying above the living wage. As you have heard today from many of the delegates, we agree with the administration's recommendation not to implement a so-called fair wage policy at this time. Construction wages are strong and far above the provincial average. With construction workers enjoying a strong economic advantage, these facts are well documented. A wage-based policy used by the city would not only isolate the city as the only buyer of construction services in Saskatchewan with such a policy, but it would also drive up administrative costs, which we've discussed. Over the past 2 years, the City of Regina has canceled 28 projects. 6 projects were over budget. Will the costs of this policy increase that number? I believe so. 13 cancellations were due to no bids, and we talked at length about the owner's contract challenges we face from city contracts, which we are working with administration. At what point do contractors decide the risks of uncertainty are too great, and what happens next is too great to work on city projects? This is a very real scenario that some of our contractors have decided is not worth it, and unfortunately, because they live in our great city and pay taxes, they're not bidding on City of Regina work. Labor shortages are a global problem, and for companies to be competitive, they are already paying significantly higher wages than Regina's living wage rate of $16.23 to retain and recruit employees. You have heard that construction projects costs have gone up over the past 5 years and that wages have not. This certainly is not true. The demand in the labor market requires employers to provide competitive wages, and a fair wage policy is unnecessary. Through what they're paying, they're gaining employees. Given that there is no problem to solve, it seems like a questionable policy to implement. We are still recovering from a pandemic, facing critical labor shortages in certain areas, supply chain issues, and rising costs of materials. I respectfully ask, is now the time to burden the taxpayers? Before I end, I want to thank the administration, council, for their diligence in engaging, their commitment to listening to us, their willingness to encourage different perspectives and leadership in bringing stakeholders together. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you on this important topic. On behalf of the Regina construction industry, I'm pleased to note that our companies stand ready to continue to build a prosperous, fair, and sustainable Regina. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Duro. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you. I spent a lot of the last week talking to many people in our community. What I figured out is many of them already meet the criteria and exceed it. In a system like this, it doesn't have to be prescriptive or stop anyone from bidding if they're not a fair wage employer, because we can set the policy how we want for our city and how we live. Viewing this, that we're going away from not just using price to figure out where a project should go, but some of the attributes of companies and how they are in our community, and knowing that all the people you represent are paying a fair wage. The people I've spoken to, I take them at their word. I believe they're paying a fair wage already. As we get busier and go through procurement, there might be people who come into our community and try to undercut on labor and cost. I'd like to reward the people I've spoken with a point system that reflects their good intention, their good standing in our community, by giving points if they choose to admit that they pay a fair wage. Do you really believe we should walk away on this and not reward people for their good efforts in our community?
You know, sir, it's a tough question. As my colleague answered before, at what point is the 1 point weighed against anything else that they've placed within their submission? Also, the costs, I want to refer to the cost. The general contractors have to gather the information, and then the city staff have to verify it. That is the administrative burden that we are facing. So I know that there's a concept. I think that if we were to market and take it out of the procurement, but market that Saskatchewan contractors and the City of Regina pay a fair wage in a marketable campaign rather than a policy, I think that's a better way of looking at it. I mean, there's a way to maybe steer the messaging, but if you have a policy, I know that contractors are withdrawing from bidding, especially in a very competitive market right now. They're withdrawing because of the owner's contract conditions. That is an absolute fact. So I hope I answered your question. If there's a follow-up, I'd like to answer that.
Actually, I do have a follow-up. The complexity of a system like this, once again, we dictate policy. There is a possibility for be self-reporting, I believe, with ease. And when I look at some of the other instances in our community, like occupational health and safety, with so many different tentacles and outpours and put back to employers all over the place, as well as things like in my industry, SGI safety inspection, so many diverse businesses, all self-reporting through SGI standards. I deal with it every day. It's not that complicated. Being that we're the policymakers, do you not think we can make a simply implemented policy that really reflects the value of our community, in that we do have a very good cost of living balance to our wages here? And that's something we should be marketing as we look for talent to bring our way. Any comments?
You know, I think it was answered previous by my colleague from the Saskatchewan Construction Association. I'm not looking to defer, but there are points that you're making that, you know, the marketability of what Regina has to offer and what we offer as a community is that, but does it have to go into a policy? What is are we willing to risk contractors, not reputable and strong contractors, not bidding on the jobs, that we want to get best value, and best values is an idea that the city has adopted. So if we're not going to be bidding on these jobs, what is the point in putting in a policy that might defer and deflect, and we all of a sudden have somebody that comes in, does poor work, adds on to the owner's contracts that we already have right now, and then our excellent contractors start seeking to work other places. Our contractors and the people that are leaders within the organizations that we are serving, they have people that live in Regina, they're paying their wages, they're the ones who are actually going and supporting hockey teams, they're supporting baseball teams, they're community-minded people, so they're already doing that. Again, I must defer why a policy with procurement. The marketing and the messaging, I think we could take that as a city. In fact, I would suggest that we would be happy to work with the city and market our city together with the construction industry, our association, and the city together. If it was a marketing campaign, I believe there's a way to do it that way. But putting in a procurement policy really is risky, and this is on behalf of the members that have advised me. So,
thank you.
My pleasure.
Councillor Mancinelli, Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. In regards to the general contractor, right, would apply, then they have lots of subcontractors underneath that. How would they then have to determine whether they're paying living wages? Like, how would you see that working through the chair?
It's an excellent question, Councillor Bresciani, and I thank you for it. I would defer to the legalities of it. I'm not sure that because of the contract being with the prime, the general contractor, and the city, that is the linear line. For a general contractor to now ask, are you going to go to ask for a T4 from a sub-trade? You want the sub-trades to provide their T4s of all the employees that are working on that job. What about the job starts when you're driving from the gas station and you fill up? Are we now going to require their gas attendant to provide a T4 that is part of the whole process, start to finish? So if we're doing a portion, we have to do it all. Otherwise, there's no reason to just start with this and expand out. So it's a whole, it's more complex, I think. So.
Yeah. In regards to when you talk about the average hourly compensation for a heavy civil construction industry is, I think it's $39.84.
Yes.
It's 11.4 above the provincial industry average, which is 145% over Regina's living wage.
That's correct.
Okay, so tell me how having this in would help. Like, I don't see the benefit.
It absolutely won't help, and I'd like to state back to the trades. We are all for trades being, and I thank the Councillor Mancinelli for his where applicable, that amendment. I think that's excellent. But if you're looking at heavy construction that does not have defined trades, how does a policy like this, with also enacting trades in there, how is that going to affect any company? If you're a big, large company, and I was to respectfully house 55 people like an organization that we're in this room, and I go get a journeyman cook or a Red Seal cook, does that qualify me because I'm in the apprentice system to get points? So the lack of clarity, the lack of understanding, and the stringent understanding of what we're trying to do here has not been articulated. And that's the risk that we face in going down this path without consideration to the ripple effect of the decision we're making today.
Last question, and Mayor Masters asked it kind of earlier. How does this affect businesses? So if they apply on an RFP with the city, they would have to then pay this, say, a higher wage, but then when they would go out to other, and I'm going to talk about the Indigenous, that's how it was shared, then, or anybody, but you'd go out, and then all of a sudden now you would you be pay lower, or like, would you adjust it, or how, what do you think?
That's the concern, because an employer that gets their check every 2 weeks or as they're working, it makes me nervous that all of a sudden we're going to be dropping wages, we're going to be raising wages, dropping wages. Let's be consistent, and it's, as you mentioned, the 145% over the living wage is an excellent wage. We are competing for the best people. Construction, I said last week, we're working on the image of construction. We want more people to get into the trades. But the first step is not by implementing a policy, it's by trusting that the statistics, which was provided by Praxis, a study that was done, I haven't heard of many studies that have been done to verify this. So I'm deferring to what was the Saskatchewan Heavy Construction Association. They commissioned the study, so that's where these recently, so it's not old data, but that's where the information is coming from. So I don't think that 145% is unreasonable over a living wage. And as my colleague said before, there's other, there's the service industry. I used to own a bar within Regina here, a restaurant. The service industry is struggling. I would challenge us to look outside of that. So where the focus is, and I've heard the arguments, and I respect them, but I just think that in a policy we can actually do better.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Councillor Bresciani, Councillor Stanichuk.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Through the chair, I do want to ask you about the administrative aspects of this, because that's one of the issues you have, is that it would be an additional administrative burden or cost. Do you have certainty of that? Like, it would depend on how the policy is crafted, would it not?
Without seeing the policy, respectfully, Councillor, I can't articulate how. If I was to see definitively and there was a prescriptive menu telling us how, then I'd be able to answer. I'm not trying to deflect. I can't speak upon something that's theoretical. Right. So the policy, dependent on what it is, administrative burden absolutely is built in, as my colleague said before. Risk is attached to any project. A schedule, without defining schedule, without having the lows and awards of the job at a reasonable time. Contractors are taking that information and they're building in that risk. So for example, right now, are we going to go forward? When does that start? So if I'm bidding on a job in March and it's not to be awarded and started until, let's say, fall, without understanding the policy, we can't articulate what that looks like. So.
Now, I think you spoke in favor, like, of the Indigenous procurement aspect and the sustainability one as well?
Absolutely.
So when I look at the sustainability procurement policy proposal, the recommendations, it to me looks very, like, significantly onerous in terms of showing, the third-party certification of diverse or social inclusiveness, demonstrated practices of social procurement in the supply chain, implementing programs for underrepresented groups. It goes on and on. Environmentally friendly waste disposable practices. There's a lot there. That to me looks like that would be a lot more administratively difficult.
Actually, I disagree, and the reason is as I mentioned before, if you used industry-driven systems like SupplierLink, it has all of ESG built into it. It has the Indigenous component built into it. So any one of our contractors, when they sign up and they're a part of the SupplierLink, Fix It Up, or even our plan, we have that data ahead of time. So to tie in with the City of Regina and to be able to have any of your procurement officials taking a look at that, we can get ahead of that. Per project, what is a fair wage on a $10 million project, let's say a stadium of $100 million? It changes per project. So the onerous conditions through technology on that is one thing, but individual general contractors, they don't know if they're getting the job. They don't know who and what subs are going to be actually working for them. So the onerous burden is taken away by technology. It's not equal or the same. What it is, it's individualized per job, and it won't be, we won't be able to do that through technology.
If, through the chair, if there were policies that we could look at, or we could design policies that, like, I do know that other cities, they have a posting of the schedule. That's the schedule. Everyone knows what it is. it's the level playing field as we've talked about before, would that make it a lot easier?
I think honestly, through the transition of the administration that's happened and through consultation, we are working with administration, and together we can get there. But right now, it feels like a roadblock that we're implementing to make progress. Like, for example, the owner's contracts conditions, I'm meeting with the city on a regular basis. So a lot of these issues that are happening, we're making progress. But what concerns me is to task the city administration to go back and work on a fair wage policy that they've been against, that the presentations and delegations have presented on. I mean, there's two sides. But for them to go back another year and do this, they're going to take away from some of the progress that needs to be made on the owner's contract conditions using the CCDC. We've talked about the Saskatchewan bid depository. But through consultation, I think that I'd rather you task the administration to figure out internally what's working, how we can work together, and then make presentations together, because I would like to support the administration on a lot of the things that we are working on together.
And so final question through the chair. You talked about, I think you did, I wrote down pre-bid workshops. I'm not sure if that's the terminology you use, but the idea of having a workshop that anyone interested in bidding on an RFP gets the information, would that help ease this whole process?
Absolutely, and we've been saying through consultation, we would love to have city officials come out and do consultation with our members, but we have to also make sure that whoever's administering that each individual has a different mindset on what the language says, and there's no consistency. So until we reach consistency, and it's either black or white or there's a gray area, we have to be able to articulate that to be able to present. Because in the debriefs with a lot of our contractors, they have a version from you, they might have a version from the person over there, and it's not consistent. So we want to get there, but through consultation, I believe that we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stanachek. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. So I have a question about this, I'll call it the state of confusion. I mean this in a respectful way. Since the last meeting, it took me about 2 hours to find answers to all of your uncertainties. Every municipality posts the methodology, the rates. I have a report here on the costs. All of those answers are out there for you. But what I'm hearing is that this is a new thing. We can't account for any of this stuff, but we can resolve it. I'm kind of curious as to why that work hasn't been done on your part, and why there's an assumption here that's an incredible administrative burden for either us or administration when this work has been done.
You know, I don't understand the first part of your question, but I can repeat that the general contractors have to gather the information, and then the city staff have to verify it respectfully. That administrative burden will cost through that risk that we built in. So the first part, when you're talking about the municipalities, can you please rephrase that or ask that again?
All of the information about how these policies are structured, the methodologies that they use, what is defined as a wage, how they're costed, et cetera, all publicly available. But you're posing this as an uncertainty and a big dilemma, but those answers have been solved, and I'm kind of curious as to why there's a disconnect.
Well, respectfully, sir, I don't feel like I'm posing it as a dilemma. I'm reporting the facts from our perspective and through our membership. So what my job is to report based upon those. My colleagues, we've done studies, so I mean, there's going to be perspectives that are different. So when you talk about other municipalities, it doesn't really affect us in other municipalities. What we're talking about is the city of Regina right here, and that's all I'm concerned about. When it comes down to the policy that our members within our organization, our taxpayers, and again, the contractors, the workers who are going to the Pats games, the Riders games, going to any of the pubs, suite, for example, we are focused on that. So what other municipalities are doing do not concern me. And you know what? We can use numbers to make anything work, but I'm just focused on that right now. So respectfully, that's
Fair enough? Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. You mentioned something, and I'm just going to ask, you mentioned something in your presentation about the City of Regina canceled 28 projects. When was that?
So through 2020 to 2022, there were 28 total canceled projects. 13 of them were no bids because the owner's conditions, contractors refused to bid on it. It wasn't worth their time or the risk. Again, back to the risk. There was 6 that were over budget, and so again, when an RFP is sent out and the responses that come back, there's a lot of work, as Delegate Benjo had spoken about, there's a lot of work going into preparation of that. There were 1 with no reason given, 1 was market issues, and 7 were scope changes. So those through 2020 through 2022, and it worries me, Your Worship, that again, implementing this policy with people, with our contractors, considering the risk and what is out there, that if you implement this, the cost will be added on through that risk. The city will be paying more, the taxpayers, it will be a burden upon the taxpayers because the project, and if they start seeing that the projects have gone up, then if they're over budget, 6 might turn into 17, which could turn into 22. I mean, we're talking theoretically, but these are real numbers.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I see no further, I lied, but Councillor Mole, I apologize, I missed you on the screen there. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say, Mr. Giroux, I'm pleased that the city administration is working with you directly as a result of this motion with issues that you guys have had in the past. So that's great to hear. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said the Regina area contractors are already paying a fair wage, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why would the contractors not bid on the Regina construction projects if they're already paying a fair wage?
Because, sir, it has nothing to do with wage. What it has to do with, and I mentioned this last week, is that the CCDC contracts, it's a construction document that is adopted throughout Canada and used by Canada. There is internal onerous conditions that are placed upon these contracts, basically null and void. They're not worth the weight that they're put on. So what happens is contracts are factoring that into the risk, and so it's nothing to do with the wage. But what it has to do with is some of the challenges. The other thing is that as a contractor, if you've bid on 5 jobs and you are supposed to receive the information on August 30th, I've bid on 5 jobs. Now I'm weighing the risk on all 5 jobs. If I don't receive the information from the city, which we have to get better at, there's no doubt about it. If I don't receive that for another 2 weeks, I cannot bid on anything else because I'm leveraged to the hilt. Then all of a sudden, it's another 7 weeks, or somebody's on holidays, and it's 10 weeks. This is what's happening, and then contractors are building in and factoring that risk. So what they've decided to do through the economy right now, and I know that you mentioned the economy last week, but they're going to bid on other projects, private or provincial or federal, because they're doing a better job of making sure that the awards are coming out on time. And our contractors also want to know the market. So whatever the bids are, privacy is not an issue. It's mandated through the trade agreements as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully these issues you're referring to are being worked on with the city.
They are, sir, and I respectfully want to give the city administration credit because they have been working on like ever before, especially the last 2 years.
Great, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mole. Now I see no further questions coming from council. Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux, for your presentation this evening. I'll have you return to the gallery.
Thank you very much.